The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast metal cave filled with strange creatures from across the galaxy. Lights flickered from crystal beings that looked like walking diamonds, while insect-like aliens clicked their sharp teeth together in anger. The air smelled of different worlds, some sweet like flowers and others bitter like burnt metal. In the center of all this chaos sat one human being who looked very small compared to the giant aliens around him. Ji-Ho Kim wore a simple black suit that made him look like he was going to a business meeting on Earth rather than facing the most powerful beings in the galaxy. His dark hair was neat and his face showed no emotion at all. He sat perfectly still while 47 different alien species shouted at him in voices that sounded like screeching birds and rumbling earthquakes. The translation devices worked hard to turn all these angry sounds into words he could understand. "Humans are like a disease that spreads everywhere," screamed High Chancellor Mordek, whose purple skin was turning darker with rage. The creature had 4 arms and each one was waving around as he spoke. "In just 50 years they have taken more space than most of us have claimed in thousands of years." The insect creatures called the Vextar made clicking sounds that hurt the ears of everyone in the room. Their leader stood up on 6 legs and pointed at Ji-Ho with sharp claws. "They build colonies on worlds that should belong to us. They dig up resources that we could use. They spread their people like seeds in the wind." A being made of pure crystal that sparkled like a rainbow began to sing in high notes that made the walls shake. The translator turned this into words that said, "The humans take and never ask permission from anyone. They act like they own the entire galaxy." Ji-Ho listened to all of this without moving a muscle in his face. His hands were folded in his lap and his back was straight. He looked like someone waiting for a train that was running late, rather than someone being yelled at by the most dangerous creatures in known space. This calm behavior made the aliens even more angry, because they wanted to see fear in his eyes. More voices joined the chorus of complaints. The hegemony representatives complained that human ships were seen in systems that belonged to them. The Trade Federation was angry that humans were selling goods for lower prices than anyone else could match. The warrior race, called the Drekthari, said that humans were weak but somehow still winning territory from stronger species. "They have no respect for the old ways," said an ancient alien whose body was covered in scales that changed color with his emotions. Right now, those scales were bright red, which meant he was furious. "They ignore treaties that have kept peace for millions of years. They settle wherever they want without asking anyone." Through all of this noise and anger, Ji-Ho Kim sat like a statue made of ice. His eyes moved from speaker to speaker, but his expression never changed. Some of the aliens began to whisper among themselves, wondering if the human was even listening to what they were saying. Others thought maybe he was too scared to speak, or perhaps too stupid to understand what was happening. Finally, the great doors at the far end of the hall opened with a sound like thunder, and everyone fell silent. Council Prime Veltara entered the room with slow, careful steps that made the floor shake under her massive weight. She was older than some planets, and had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Her 6 arms moved with the grace of someone who had learned patience over countless centuries, and her ancient eyes held wisdom that could fill libraries. Veltara took her place on the great throne that was carved from a single piece of star metal. When she spoke, her voice filled the entire hall without any need for amplification. "We have heard the complaints against the species known as humanity of the planet Terra," she said in words that seemed to carry the weight of ages. "The evidence is clear that they have expanded beyond all reasonable limits." Ji-Ho finally moved. For the first time in hours. He stood up slowly and smoothed down his suit jacket with hands that were perfectly steady. "Your Honor," he said in a voice that was calm and polite. "Humans have only settled on dead worlds that no other species wanted or claimed." The hall erupted in angry sounds again. Creatures roared and screeched and made noises that had no names, in any language. Some of them stood up and waved appendages in the air while others changed colors to show their rage. The translation devices could barely keep up with all the different languages being spoken at once. "Dead worlds today," shouted one alien, "but what about tomorrow when you decide you want our living worlds too? You take resources that could be used by species who have been here longer than your entire civilization has existed," yelled another creature, whose mouth had too many teeth to count. Jiho waited for the noise to die down before he spoke again. His voice remained calm and level, as if he was discussing the weather rather than defending his entire species. We have never taken anything that belonged to someone else. We have never attacked anyone. We have only built homes on rocks floating in empty space. This answer made the aliens even more angry because it was technically true, but they felt it missed the real point. They wanted humans to know their place in the galaxy, which was supposed to be small and unimportant. But humans kept growing stronger and taking up more space, and this frightened the older species who were used to being the ones in charge. Veltara raised all 6 of her arms, and the hall became quiet again. When she spoke this time, her words carried the authority of someone who had ruled over galactic affairs since before humans had invented writing. "Humanity of Terra," she said, "this council has decided by unanimous vote that your expansion must stop immediately." The silence in the hall was complete now. Even the crystal beings stopped their constant humming, and the insect creatures held perfectly still. Everyone waited to hear what came next because they knew these words would change everything. "You will withdraw from all contested systems within 1 standard galactic year," Veltara continued. "You will limit your colonies to the systems you held 50 years ago. You will seek permission from this council before establishing any new settlements. If you refuse to comply with these orders, you will face consequences that your species cannot imagine." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Some of the aliens leaned forward in their seats, eager to see how the human would react to this ultimatum. Others sat back with satisfied expressions, thinking that finally the upstart humans would learn to respect their betters. Jiho Kim looked up at the ancient Council Prime with eyes that showed no fear at all. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could be carved from winter itself. "I will deliver your message to my government on Earth," he said in a voice that was colder than the space between stars. He turned and walked toward the great doors without asking permission to leave. His footsteps echoed in the silent hall, and every alien watched him go with the satisfaction of predators who thought they had just cornered their prey. None of them noticed that the human's smile had not been one of submission or fear. As the doors closed behind Jiho Kim, the aliens began to congratulate themselves on finally putting the humans in their proper place. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Admiral Minho Park stood in the command center deep inside the moon, watching red lights blink across a map that showed all of human space. Each light represented a military base or hidden weapon facility or secret research station that most people in the galaxy did not know existed. The room was filled with officers wearing uniforms that had no decorations or medals because their work was too secret to be celebrated in public. The holographic display stretched from floor to ceiling, showing hundreds of solar systems where humans had built colonies. But now the peaceful farming worlds and mining stations were revealing their true nature. Hidden doors opened in mountains to show missile batteries that could destroy spaceships. Underground factories that everyone thought made farming equipment were actually building weapons that broke several galactic treaties. Cargo ships that had been carrying food and supplies for decades suddenly sprouted armor plating and weapon systems. "Status report," Minho said in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. His face was scarred from battles that had never been recorded in any official history books. He had spent 30 years fighting wars that the civilian population never knew about while they enjoyed peace and prosperity. General Hana Lee stepped forward with data tablets in both hands. Her left arm was mechanical from the elbow down, and her right eye was replaced with something that looked like a camera lens. She had lost these body parts fighting against pirates in the outer systems during conflicts that were officially listed as mining accidents. "All fleet commanders have received Directive 7, she reported. "The shipyards are running day and night shifts. Every civilian transport is being converted to military specifications." Minho nodded slowly while studying the tactical display. Red lines showed the movement of human ships throughout the galaxy as they moved from their peaceful positions to form battle formations. The aliens who watched human space through their spy networks would see normal commercial traffic continuing. As usual, they had no idea that cargo freighters were actually troop transports and that merchant vessels carried enough firepower to level cities. Dr. Doyun Choi looked up from his workstation where he was running calculations on weapons that existed only in theoretical physics papers. His research team had been developing technologies that pushed the laws of science to their breaking point. The antimatter torpedo tests were successful, he said with the excitement of someone who had just solved a puzzle that had frustrated him for years. Each warhead can crack open a moon or turn a space station into dust. The admiral walked over to another display that showed the galaxy from a strategic viewpoint. Human territory looked small compared to the vast empires of the older alien species, but appearances could be deceiving. What the display did not show was that humans had been quietly building military bases in systems that were officially empty. Secret stations hidden in asteroid fields could launch attacks on any major trade route. Listening posts, disguised as research facilities, had been gathering intelligence on alien military capabilities for decades. Intelligence Director Narration entered the command center carrying files that contained information about every species in the Galactic Council. Her department had spent years studying alien psychology and military doctrine and tactical weaknesses. She knew which species would panic under pressure, and which ones would fight to the death, and which ones could be turned against their allies with the right kind of persuasion. The aliens think they understand humans because they have met our traders and diplomats and scientists, she said with a smile that would have made a shark proud. They have no idea that we keep our military separate from our civilian population. They judge our entire species based on the merchants who sell them goods and the explorers who map new star systems. This was the key to humanity's strategy. Other species mixed their warriors with their civilians so everyone knew what their military capabilities looked like. But humans had learned from their history on Earth to keep their armed forces hidden until they were needed. The galaxy knew about human traders who would sell anything to anyone for the right price. They knew about human scientists who loved to study new forms of life and share their discoveries. They knew about human engineers who could fix any machine and human doctors who would treat patients from any species. What they did not know about were the human soldiers who had been training in secret bases since childhood. They did not know about the human intelligence networks that had agents on every major world in the galaxy. They did not know about the human weapons researchers who had been developing tools of war that made nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. On Earth, Prime Minister Taewon Jung was addressing the Global Assembly in a session that was being broadcast to every human colony in the galaxy. The representatives from 500 worlds listened as their leader explained what was about to happen. His words were calm, but everyone who heard them understood that history was about to change direction. For 50 years, we have been the galaxy's favorite trading partners, he said while looking directly into the cameras that would carry his speech to billions of people. We have sold our goods at fair prices and shared our knowledge freely and helped other species solve problems that had puzzled them for centuries. We have been good neighbors and honest business partners and reliable allies. He paused to let these words sink in before continuing. But the galaxy has made a mistake. They think that because we prefer trade to warfare and diplomacy to conquest, that we must be weak. They think that because we smile when we meet them and offer help when they need it, that we cannot defend ourselves when threatened. The assembly hall was completely silent as representatives from farming worlds and mining, colonies and research stations waited to hear what came next. Many of these people had never seen a military uniform or weapon more dangerous than a mining laser. They were about to learn that their peaceful civilization had been protected by guardians they never knew existed. The Galactic Council has given us an ultimatum, Jung continued. They want us to abandon colonies we have built with our own hands on worlds that were dead rocks before we arrived. They want us to ask permission before we expand into empty space that belongs to no one. They want us to become a junior member of their club and follow rules we had no part in making. More silence filled the hall as everyone processed these words. The Council's demand was not just an insult to human independence, but also a threat to everything they had built among the stars. I want to be very clear about our response to this ultimatum, the Prime Minister said. We will not abandon a single colony. We will not ask permission to settle on dead worlds. We will not accept limitations on human expansion into space that has no other claimants. And if the Council wants to use force to make us comply with their demands, then they are about to discover something about humanity that we have kept hidden until now. Across human space, the transformation began immediately, after Jung finished speaking. Merchant ships that had been carrying trade goods to alien worlds suddenly changed course and headed for hidden bases where they would be converted into warships. Agricultural colonies activated defense systems that had been built underground and disguised as irrigation networks. Mining operations revealed that they had been extracting materials for building weapons rather than just gathering resources for trade. The humans that the galaxy knew and trusted began to disappear as if they had never existed. In their place appeared something much older and more dangerous. The galaxy was about to meet the descendants of the only species that had conquered an entire planet through warfare and somehow survived their own violence long enough to reach the stars. In military bases hidden throughout human territory, soldiers who had been training in secret for their entire lives prepared for a war that everyone else thought was impossible. These were not the friendly humans who sold goods at space stations or explored new worlds with scientific instruments. These were the genetic heirs of every warrior who had ever lived on Earth, and they had been waiting their whole lives for someone to threaten their people. The galaxy had issued an ultimatum expecting submission. Instead, they were about to receive an education in why peaceful species could sometimes be the most dangerous ones of all. The deadline passed like a storm cloud moving across an empty sky, and not a single human colony had withdrawn from any system anywhere in the galaxy. On every world that humans had claimed, the settlements continued their daily activities as if the Council's ultimatum had never been delivered. Farmers tended their crops while miners extracted resources and researchers continued their experiments. To outside observers, it looked like humanity had simply ignored the most powerful political body in known space. In the ornate chambers of the Galactic Council, Prime Veltara's rage made the ancient building shake on its foundations. Her 6 arms moved like the branches of trees in a hurricane while her voice boomed through speakers that carried her words to every member world. The crystal beings resonated with frequencies that cracked windows, while the insect creatures clicked their mandibles so rapidly it sounded like hailstones hitting metal roofs. "They mock us," she declared while her enormous form towered over the assembled representatives. "They treat our authority like a joke told by children. Send the Enforcement Division immediately and make an example of one of their colonies so they understand what defiance costs." Fleet Commander Korthak of the militant Drekthari species volunteered to lead the mission personally. He was a veteran of dozens of campaigns against species who had challenged Council authority, and his reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout the galaxy. His scarred hide told the story of battles fought on worlds whose names had been erased from star charts after their populations learned too late what happened to those who resisted the established order. 300 warships of the Galactic Enforcement Division gathered at the edge of human space like a swarm of metal predators preparing to feed. These vessels represented the combined military might of 47 different species and carried enough firepower to sterilize entire planets. The crews were seasoned warriors who had brought dozens of rebellious worlds back into line through demonstrations of overwhelming force. Their target was New Incheon, a small agricultural colony on the outer edge of human territory. Intelligence reports described it as a typical farming settlement with a population of barely 50,000 civilians who grew crops that were shipped to other human worlds. There were no military installations visible from orbit and no defensive systems that appeared on any scan. It looked like the perfect target for a demonstration that would show all of humanity what happened to those who defied the Council. Korthak's flagship led the enforcement fleet into the system with weapons powered and targeting systems locked onto the human settlement below. He opened communication channels on all frequencies so that his message would be recorded and broadcast throughout human space. "Surrender your illegal colony immediately," he commanded in a voice that had made entire species submit to Council authority. "Evacuate all personnel and abandon this system or we will remove you by force." The response came from the planet's surface in the form of a transmission that was so calm it sounded like someone ordering coffee at a restaurant. "Galactic Enforcement Division, this is New Incheon Colony Control. Your vessels are in violation of human territorial space. Please withdraw immediately to avoid any unfortunate incidents." Korthak's laughter echoed through the command bridge of his flagship and was transmitted to every ship in the fleet. The idea that a small farming colony would threaten his massive force struck him as the most amusing thing he had heard in years. Human colony, you are outnumbered 300 to 1. We see no military vessels in your system and no defensive installations on your world. Surrender now or face complete destruction. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations to come. Space itself seemed to tear open as reality bent and twisted around points of absolute darkness. From these tears in the fabric of the universe emerged vessels that looked like they had been designed by someone who understood that true terror came not from size, but from the promise of absolute destruction. The human warships were angular and black with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with the fluid grace of hunting sharks, while their weapon systems powered up with sounds like distant thunder. Each ship was twice the size of the largest council vessel and radiated a menace that made veteran warriors check their life support systems and emergency escape pods. Captain Yunji Seo commanded the lead human vessel from a bridge that looked more like a tomb than a command center. Her voice when she spoke was colder than the void between galaxies and carried the authority of someone who had never needed to raise her voice to be obeyed. Galactic Enforcement Division, you are trespassing in sovereign human space. This is your only warning to withdraw immediately. Korthak stared at the tactical display showing 5 human ships positioned around his fleet like the points of a star. His 300 vessels suddenly seemed small and fragile compared to these dark predators that had appeared from nowhere. But he was a Drakthari warrior, who had built his reputation on never backing down from any fight no matter what the odds. 5 ships against 300. He broadcast on open channels so that his entire fleet could hear the confidence in his voice. Humans, your arrogance will be your destruction. All units open fire and show them what real military power looks like. The enforcement fleet unleashed everything they had in a coordinated barrage that lit up space like a newborn star. Energy beams and missile salvos and plasma bolts converged on the human vessels in an attack that should have vaporized anything in its path. The display was magnificent and terrible and represented the combined military doctrine of dozens of species who had perfected the art of warfare over millions of years. When the light faded and the energy dissipated, the human ships remained exactly where they had been without even a scorch mark on their hulls. Captain Yunji Seo's response was delivered in the same emotionless tone she might use to comment on the weather. Your turn. What followed was not a battle, but a demonstration of technological superiority so complete that it redefined what warfare meant in the Galactic Age. The human vessels moved through the enforcement fleet like death made manifest while their weapon systems carved through alien ships with surgical precision. Advanced shielding that had protected council vessels for centuries collapsed under the impact of human weapons that operated on principles their scientists did not understand. Korthak watched in horror as his flagship's tactical display showed ship after ship disappearing from his formation. The humans were not just destroying their enemies but doing it with a casual efficiency that was somehow more terrifying than raw brutality. They targeted engine systems to cripple vessels rather than obliterate them completely. They disabled weapons arrays instead of vaporizing entire ships. They were demonstrating that they could have killed everyone in the fleet, but were choosing to show mercy. Captain Seo's voice cut through the chaos on the communication channels with words that would haunt the dreams of every survivor. Commander Korthak, you have 17 minutes to collect your survivors and withdraw from this system. After that time expires, we will consider any remaining vessels to be hostile targets and respond accordingly. The Drakthari fleet commander found himself in the position that no warrior of his species had ever faced before. He was being offered mercy by an enemy who had just proven they could destroy his entire fleet whenever they chose to do so. His pride demanded that he fight to the death, but his responsibility to his crews meant that he had to accept the humiliation of retreat. 12 ships limped away from New Incheon carrying the survivors of what had been the most powerful military force ever assembled by the Galactic Council. Behind them, the human warships resumed their patrol patterns, as if nothing significant had happened. Captain Seo did not. even bother to watch the aliens leave because they were no longer worth her attention. The entire engagement had lasted exactly 17 minutes from first contact to final withdrawal. 300 of the galaxy's most advanced warships had been reduced to scrap metal by 5 human vessels that had appeared from nowhere and would probably disappear back to wherever they came from once their work was finished. Recordings of the battle spread throughout the galaxy faster than light itself, as species that had never heard of humanity suddenly found themselves studying footage of human military capabilities. The friendly merchants and curious explorers and helpful scientists that everyone knew were revealed to be just one face of a civilization that had been hiding its true nature since first contact. The galaxy had demanded a demonstration of human submission and instead received a lesson in human power. The message was clear to anyone intelligent enough to understand it. Humanity had been choosing to be peaceful, not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to choose their own path. In the ruins of the enforcement fleet, survivors transmitted their reports back to the council chambers, where representatives from 47 species listened in stunned silence to accounts of human military technology that made their own forces look like children playing with toys. The species that had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy were learning that they had been sharing space with something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in an atmosphere thick with fear and confusion, as representatives from 47 species tried to process what they had witnessed at New Incheon. The great hall that had once echoed with confident threats and imperial declarations now buzzed with nervous whispers and anxious clicking sounds from creatures who suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the balance of power in the galaxy. Holographic displays throughout the chamber showed the same footage on endless repeat. Human warships emerging from nowhere like predators materializing from the darkness of deep space. The enforcement fleet's weapons firing in coordinated barrages that should have destroyed anything in their path. The complete failure of those weapons against human defensive systems. And then the methodical destruction of 300 council vessels by just 5 human ships that moved with the cold efficiency of professional executioners. Ambassador Ji-Ho Kim entered the council chambers and immediately noticed how different everything felt compared to his previous visit. Where alien representatives had once postured and made threatening gestures, they now sat quietly in their assigned places while casting nervous glances in his direction. The insectoid Vextar who had clicked their mandibles aggressively before now held their sharp appendages close to their bodies, like creatures trying to make themselves appear smaller and less threatening. Council Prime Veltara took her position on the great throne, but her usual commanding presence seemed diminished somehow. Her ancient voice still carried authority, but underneath the formal words was something that sounded almost like uncertainty. When she spoke to address the human ambassador, her tone was careful and measured rather than imperious and demanding. Ambassador Kim, she began, while her 6 arms moved in what looked like gestures of greeting rather than dominance. We have reviewed the incident at New Incheon and find ourselves in need of clarification regarding human military capabilities. The phrase incident at New Incheon was itself telling, because what had happened there was not an incident but a complete military disaster for the Council forces. 300 warships reduced to debris and survivors in less than 20 minutes by an enemy they had vastly underestimated. Calling it an incident was like describing a hurricane as a gentle breeze. Ji-Ho took his place at the speaker's podium, with the same calm demeanor he had displayed during his previous appearance, but now every alien in the chamber was paying attention to his body language, looking for clues about what humanity might do next. His simple black suit and unremarkable appearance had once made him seem insignificant compared to the exotic alien representatives around him, but now those same qualities made him appear mysteriously dangerous. "Your Honor," he replied in the same polite tone he had used before. Humanity responded to an unprovoked military attack on our sovereign territory, using appropriate defensive measures. The phrase appropriate defensive measures sent ripples of nervous energy through the assembled aliens because what they had witnessed looked more like a demonstration of overwhelming technological superiority than simple self-defense. The human ships had not just repelled the Council fleet, but had destroyed it so thoroughly that survivors would spend years in therapy, trying to cope with the trauma. High Chancellor Mordek, who had been among the most vocal critics of human expansion, during the previous session now spoke with a voice that trembled slightly as he tried to maintain his authority while acknowledging the new reality. Ambassador, we had no knowledge that humanity possessed such advanced military technology. Your species has always presented itself as primarily focused on trade and exploration. This was the heart of the matter that had the entire council struggling to understand their situation. For 50 years, they had interacted with humans who seemed interested mainly in buying and selling goods and discovering new planets and making friends with alien species. The galaxy's intelligence networks had identified human colonies and trade routes and diplomatic missions, but had found no evidence of the military-industrial complex that must have existed to produce the weapons they had witnessed. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stepped forward to stand beside Jiho at the speaker's podium. Her credentials as humanity's leading expert on xenobiology gave her words additional weight when she addressed the assembled aliens. Honored representatives, humanity has indeed focused primarily on peaceful pursuits during our expansion into galactic civilization. However, we have also maintained adequate defensive capabilities as any responsible species should do. The word adequate was clearly an understatement of massive proportions given what everyone had seen in the battle recordings, but her clinical tone made the statement sound like a simple factual observation rather than a threat. This combination of politeness and understated menace was somehow more unsettling than open aggression would have been. We have studied each of your species extensively during our decades in the galactic community, she continued while consulting a datapad that presumably contained detailed files on every alien race represented in the chamber. We understand your biological requirements, your cultural preferences, your technological capabilities, and your military doctrines. This knowledge has helped us become better trading partners and more effective diplomatic allies. What she did not need to say explicitly was that this same knowledge would make humanity extremely effective enemies if the current situation escalated into actual warfare. Every species in the chamber suddenly realized that while they had been dismissing humans as harmless merchants, those same humans had been quietly gathering intelligence that could be used against them. Fleet Admiral Wansik Nam entered the chamber, wearing a military uniform that bore decorations and service ribbons from conflicts that most of the aliens had never heard of. His presence added a new dimension to the human delegation, because he represented the part of humanity that had remained hidden until now. His scarred face and mechanical left hand told stories of battles fought in places where the galaxy's news services never ventured. Honored council members, he said in a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, the vessels you encountered at New Incheon represent a small fraction of humanity's defensive capabilities. We maintain military forces appropriate to our responsibilities as protectors of human civilian populations throughout the galaxy. The phrase, small fraction, hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow, because if 5 ships could destroy a Council enforcement fleet, what could humanity do with their full military might? The Admiral's matter-of-fact delivery made it clear that he was stating simple facts rather than making threats. But the implications were terrifying for species that had grown comfortable thinking of themselves as the galaxy's dominant military powers. We have weapons systems that could sterilize inhabited worlds without deploying ground forces. He continued in the same conversational tone someone might use to discuss lunch plans. We have soldiers trained from birth in combat techniques that most species cannot imagine. We have intelligence networks that extend into every major population center in council space. Each sentence was delivered like a hammer blow against the yaoi confidence of alien representatives who were beginning to understand that they had been living in a fool's paradise for decades. The humans they thought they knew were apparently just the public face of a civilization that had been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation since they first left their home world. Jiho stepped forward again to address the council directly, and his words carried the weight of speaking for an entire species that had just revealed its true capabilities. Humanity prefers peaceful cooperation to military conflict. We always have and we always will. Commerce builds prosperity for everyone, while warfare destroys value for all participants. He paused to let this statement settle in the minds of his listeners, before continuing with words that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. However, we also believe that peace must be based on mutual respect rather than the submission of the weak to the strong. The Council's ultimatum was based on the assumption that humanity would accept whatever terms were offered because we lacked the power to resist. The silence in the Great Hall was so complete that the ambient sounds of the building's environmental systems seemed loud by comparison. Representatives who had spent their careers negotiating from positions of strength suddenly found themselves on the other side of the power equation, and the experience was deeply unsettling. The question now before this council, Jiho concluded, is whether you wish to continue treating humanity as a junior partner who must ask permission for everything we do, or whether you are prepared to accept us as equals in the galactic community with all the rights and responsibilities that status entails. For the first time in the recorded history of galactic civilization, the Council found itself negotiating from a position of weakness, and the experience was teaching them lessons about humility that they had never needed to learn before. 6 months after the Battle of New Incheon, the galaxy had settled into a new rhythm that everyone was still learning to navigate. Human merchant ships continued to ply the established trade routes with their crews displaying the same friendly curiosity and eager willingness to do business that had characterized human commercial activities for decades. But now every alien who dealt with these traders understood that behind their smiles and handshakes stood the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. Ambassador Jiho Kim took his assigned seat at the council table, but his position had changed dramatically from his previous visits to the Great Hall. Instead of sitting in the peripheral section reserved for minor species, he now occupied a chair at the main table with full voting rights and the authority to speak on any matter that came before the assembled representatives. Around him, alien delegates maintained careful politeness that replaced their former contempt with something that resembled actual respect. The Galactic Trade Consortium had undergone complete restructuring as economic realities forced themselves upon political ideologies that had dominated galactic commerce for centuries. Human manufacturing capabilities and resource extraction efficiency had made their goods highly competitive in every market. But now trading partners understood that refusing to do business with humanity was not just economically foolish but potentially dangerous from a security standpoint. New shipping routes opened through previously contested regions as human patrol vessels provided security for merchant fleets from all species. Pirates and raiders who had operated with impunity in certain sectors found themselves facing human military responses that made their traditional victims look like harmless prey animals. The galaxy became a safer place for legitimate commerce almost overnight, as word spread that attacking any vessel under human protection would result in swift and terrible retribution. Captain Eunji Seo commanded her flagship on patrol missions through the Outer Rim territories where she maintained the peace through a combination of visible presence and unspoken threats. Her ship and its crew had become legendary throughout the frontier regions not just for their combat capabilities but for their absolute professionalism in dealing with potential troublemakers. Pirates surrendered without firing a shot when they recognized her vessel on their sensors because everyone knew that Captain Asio preferred to take prisoners when possible, but had no qualms about turning pirates into space debris when circumstances required it. The human military remained largely invisible to civilian populations throughout the galaxy, but their presence could be felt in the increased stability of interstellar commerce and the sudden disappearance of territorial disputes that had simmered for generations. Worlds that had spent centuries arguing over mining rights and trade routes found themselves working together on development projects that benefited everyone involved, because human mediation carried an authority that no one was willing to challenge. On Earth, Prime Minister Tae Won-jung addressed the Global Assembly in sessions that were now broadcast throughout human space and monitored by intelligence services from every major galactic power. His words carried weight far beyond the borders of human territory, because everyone understood that he spoke for a civilization that could back up its diplomatic positions with military force that made traditional power structures obsolete. We did not seek this position of influence in galactic affairs, he told the assembled representatives from humanity's 500 colonies. But we have learned that in a galaxy filled with predators, showing weakness is often interpreted as an invitation to become prey. Our ancestors on Earth understood this principle when they developed the military capabilities that eventually allowed them to reach the stars. The transformation of human space continued as colonies that had appeared to be simple agricultural or mining operations revealed the true scope of their defensive preparations. Underground facilities that had been disguised as storage areas for farming equipment turned out to be manufacturing centers for advanced weapons systems. Research stations that claimed to study planetary geology were actually developing new types of military technology that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Dr. Doyen Choi worked in laboratories that had been hidden beneath civilian research facilities for decades, while his teams developed weapons that made the antimatter torpedoes used at New Incheon look primitive by comparison. His latest project involved manipulating fundamental forces in ways that could theoretically collapse the molecular bonds holding matter together, but he kept these developments classified at levels that prevented even most human military personnel from knowing they existed. The galaxy's major powers found themselves studying human expansion patterns with new eyes, as they realized that what they had interpreted as random colonization was actually a carefully planned strategic deployment. Human settlements were positioned to control key trade routes and resource deposits while maintaining defensive positions that could support each other in case of coordinated attack. What had looked like peaceful expansion was revealed to be the most sophisticated military deployment in galactic history. Intelligence Director Nari Yoon compiled reports from human agents embedded throughout alien civilizations who provided information about political developments and military preparations and economic trends that could affect human interests. Her networks had been gathering intelligence for decades, while the aliens focused their attention on human commercial activities and missed the spy operations that were documenting their every weakness and vulnerability. The Galactic Council found itself dealing with a new kind of diplomatic reality as they learned to negotiate with a species that could enforce its positions through superior military technology. Previous councils had operated on the assumption that political authority derived from the collective agreement of member species, but now they had to consider the preferences of a single species that could potentially defeat all the others combined. Alien representatives who had once dismissed human concerns about expansion rights and colonization permits now found themselves carefully studying human proposals and offering compromises that would have been unthinkable before the demonstration at New Incheon. The balance of power had shifted so dramatically that species which had dominated galactic politics for millions of years were reduced to hoping that humanity would continue to prefer negotiation to conquest. New treaties were drafted with language that acknowledged human territorial claims and expansion rights while establishing protocols for resolving disputes through arbitration rather than military action. These agreements represented the first time in galactic history that a single species had forced the entire council to restructure their fundamental approaches to interstellar law and diplomacy. Human colonies expanded freely into previously forbidden systems as terraforming ships converted dead worlds into garden paradises that supported millions of settlers. The galaxy's established powers watched this expansion with nervous fascination, because they understood that each new human world represented not just increased economic capacity, but also another potential military base in a defensive network that already covered more territory than most alien empires. The long-term implications of humanity's revealed capabilities continued to reshape galactic civilization, as species that had never cooperated began working together on projects that would have been impossible without human security guarantees. Scientific research accelerated as human protection allowed alien scientists to work in regions that had been too dangerous for civilian operations. Cultural exchanges flourished as human merchant fleets provided safe passage for diplomatic missions and educational programs. But beneath all this cooperation and prosperity lay the understanding that the galaxy's peace depended on human restraint rather than any balance of power between competing civilizations. Everyone knew that humanity could end any threat to their interest whenever they chose to do so, and this knowledge made every interaction with human representatives carry an undertone of respect that bordered on fear. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about judging species by their public behavior, rather than their hidden capabilities. The friendly merchants and curious explorers that everyone had thought they understood were revealed to be representatives of the most dangerous civilization in known space, but perhaps more importantly, They had also learned that the most dangerous species might also be the most reasonable one, if approached with appropriate respect. As historians would later write, the period following the New Incheon incident marked the beginning of the long peace, not because conflicts disappeared, but because everyone understood that challenging humanity would result in consequences too terrible to contemplate. The galaxy had finally found a species powerful enough to enforce peace and wise enough to prefer it to conquest.